Welcome to the Next Wave podcast by Wavy Gang. This is Tyler. We got Charles on the mic. He goes by Chuck as well. We also have Ryan, who's going to double as a mic, and he's also our producer.
So how was this past weekend for you, T-Hole?
Went to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and skied/snowboarded Pajarito, which is a good spot out there in Los Alamos. And if you're not familiar with Los Alamos, that is where they actually practiced atomic bombs, like nuclear bombs. So they have canyons all across the city as far as you can see. So once you get to the top of the mountain, you can see canyons for miles, which is a great view. It's a small mountain. It's not really a small mountain. It's a nice mountain that doesn't have long lines.
Yeah.
It's not super talked about, I believe, unless
Pretty family friendly then?
Super family friendly. A lot of very reasonable runs, but also challenging runs with black diamonds, double black diamonds. And for the most part, you can get in and get out pretty quick. You can get right off the lift and go to your car and eat lunch or have a drink and
nice
enjoy the scenery, and then you can get right back on the lift about 100 feet from your car. So it's a super convenient resort.
Yeah, resorts like that are always really nice to learn on, especially if you're new to snowboarding and whatnot. The only time I've ever been to New Mexico was for my first time when I was 16 in Ruidoso at Ski Apache. Have you ever been there?
I haven't been to either of those, actually.
Well, Ski Apache is in Ruidoso. Ruidoso's the town. But yeah, I don't know, the conditions kind of sucked. It was super icy the day we went, and I think it was like around spring break time. So I mean, it wasn't great. Snow wasn't good.
Slushy.
Yeah, it was slushy. It hadn't snowed in like a week or so, or at least I don't remember. I just remember it being icy and not. I don't know. I was so sore because I think I fell probably 100 times my first day.
It's like falling on concrete out there with that condition.
Oh, dude, that shit sucks.
Honestly, I think the best condition for New Mexico is right around this time of year, like January, February. That's when they get a lot of good snow. And if you go on a day where it's a couple snow days beforehand, you usually have pretty good conditions and a lot of bluebird days.
Yeah, I got you.
A lot of good food options out there too. Breweries. There's some super organic and natural approaches to their cuisine. You'll see a lot of different Mexican food and some interesting spots too. There was a spot where if you paid $9 to $10, they give you clay and you could actually make pottery while you enjoyed a beverage or enjoyed a snack, which I thought that was super unique and a great idea if you're pretty creative. So, if you're interested in trying new things,
that could be fun, dude. I've never done pottery before.
Santa Fe is a weird but cool place at the same time.
Yeah, it seems like it's like kind of that Native American kind of tradition too.
Definitely,
the idea
100%.
like with the pottery and like they probably like jewelry and all the turquoise and stuff down there or whatnot.
Very enriched with their culture, very in tune with their background.
Oh yeah.
And their downtown it's different. It's not like there's any major buildings or anything. So if you're not really big into the city life or, you like the dive places, it's a really good spot.
Gotcha. Well, you wanna explain kind of what the goal is of this podcast and what we're gonna be doing today?
So with our first episode, we're actually going full send right now. Our objective is to cover some different injuries and injury history and approach to recovery and rehabilitation. And we are actually going to cover Kevin Pearce today and a traumatic brain injury that he sustained during his training.
Yeah, it's pretty famous in like the snowboarding world. He was the up and coming guy against Shaun White. And if you know snowboarding, you pretty much know Kevin Pearce and Shaun White, especially in the early 2000s, right before about 2010. Yeah, we're really just kind of promoting all the sports that we love, that we grew up playing. We're all three collegiate athletes here. Ryan's the only D2 guy, so he made it to the highest level. Congrats, Ryan.
Thank you.
Where'd you
Yep,
play?
4-year starter, baby.
There you go. There you
I
go.
played at Upper Iowa University. I was center field. It's a good
Hell
time.
yeah.
He was all Division II defense. He's being a little modest right now.
Yeah. Gold glove, they here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
70% of the world is covered by water, and the rest is covered by number 5 Ryan Hull.
Yeah, that is
Upper Iowa Peacocks.
a real quote by my coach.
That's
That
a real
is
quote.
awesome. That
It's
is
out there.
That is a great quote for an outfielder. I've never heard that before. That's good. And then T-Hole was you were a two-sport athlete in college at Southwestern.
Two-sport athlete with a storied history of injuries and adversity. So it wasn't the smoothest college ride, but it definitely helped me out with some mental approaches and also physical approaches.
Yeah, well, that's why we're friends, and you're in good company. I guess you could call me a D3 baseball player, even though my whole career lasted a whole 2 1/3 innings. That's all I pitched and played in before I blew out my elbow and had a Tommy John surgery that lasted, the recovery lasted for me 2 years when most people recover after one. It was just one problem after another, and it really, really sucked and discouraged me. So I just decided, after junior year to quit and kind of enjoy my senior year of college. So that was my whole career in college. It wasn't much. It was short-lived, but it was still fun.
If there's anything to know about Charles, aka Chuck, he's going to go full send every single time.
Yeah, that's probably why I got hurt so much. But that's okay.
A lot of those injuries, they happen in chains for one another. So when you hurt your elbow or hurt your shoulder, sometimes those can go hand in hand if one or the other gets injured. So even my history too, through football, I actually experienced quite a bit of concussions through my playing time, and that's what moved me on to baseball. Within football too, I had an Achilles injury as well as a shoulder injury through high school, and also moving into baseball at the college level. The concussion actually pushed me into try and play college baseball, and I was actually more influenced by a pitching coach of mine that he had played over 16 years in the professional leagues and caught for Roy Oswalt, and
Who's the coach?
his name was Brian Peterson.
Oh, okay.
He also coached Ryan as well for a number of years, hitting and pitching, fielding, all of the above. Threw a bullpen to him, and he should say you should drop football and play baseball instead. So there's some pretty big influence there.
Yeah, it's a good idea to get away from football after you've had a couple concussions. You don't want to go down that road.
Playing baseball, rotator cuff tear and the infraspinatus and partial in the supraspinatus, and also going hand in hand with thoracic outlet syndrome. So my right arm would go numb in and out of the days. Some days I couldn't control where I was throwing the ball or how fast, and I would have tremors through the thumb, pointer, and middle finger, which is a pretty big spot to have control while you're throwing a baseball.
Yeah, that could be a problem. I remember that. Oh, all right. Well, should we get into the story?
Let's do it.
All right. So I'll be taking over on this first episode. Like Tyler said, we're going to be going over Kevin Pearce and his TBI that occurred in 2009, just before the Vancouver, right? Vancouver Olympics?
Vancouver Winter Olympics in 2010.
In 2010, that's right. So just for a little background, in case just to give everybody kind of understanding on who Kevin Pearce was. He was a kid who was born in Hanover, New Hampshire, and he grew up in Heartland with his family. And he had three older brothers, Adam, David, and Andrew. And David was actually born with Down syndrome, and we'll get to him in a little bit. But he was kind of like another inspiring story inside of this really inspiring story, and I really enjoyed really getting to know David as well as the rest of the family. They seem like a really tight knit crew and just a very loving and kind of together family. You know what I mean?
Tight knit crew, a lot of support, and if you're not familiar with Heartland, that's actually in Vermont, so they're actually out of the Northeast.
Yes, correct. Before I think his parents eventually moved to Norwich, Vermont. Still in Vermont.
Still in Vermont, which that's on the bucket list to go shred Vermont.
Oh yeah, dude.
Maybe get out into Killington or something like that. That's where they have done X Games and Dew Tour before, so it's a big spot for a lot of skiers and snowboarders as well.
For sure, for sure. And growing up, it seemed like they were all a very active family as well. Where I got most of my information for this, there's a documentary on Amazon Prime at the moment. It's called The Crash Reel. It really documents Kevin Pearce's life growing up snowboarding and his brothers, his family, his friends, and his crew. And Shaun White is in it too as well. And it kind of just documents his whole experience with this traumatic injury that he suffered, and kind of the sport of snowboarding and extreme sports as well. And highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. You should definitely go check it out. Anyway, growing up, they were a very, very active family from a very early age. You could see Kevin always like snowboarding, surfing, really anything that he could do to be outside. I believe he started like entering competitions and snowboarding events when he was the age of 10, and it really just came really easy to him. Cool moment in the documentary. As a kid, I believe he was 10 at this time, he actually went up to Jake Burton himself and just point blank asked him to make him a board. And it was actually the first children's board that Jake Burton ever made for anyone, and I'm pretty sure still has it to this day.
It's a lot of confidence to go up to Jake Burton and say, "Hey man, just make me a board. Let's make this happen."
Yeah, that's a bold kid. I don't think I would do that as a kid.
I mean, that's the level of confidence it takes to perform at a high level right there.
Oh yeah, like from day one, he had the confidence of like a super athlete.
But yeah, he competed in a lot of competitions, and that's actually where he ended up meeting Shaun White as well, and they ended up kicking it off and becoming friends. And there was a point in time where he actually lived with Shaun White, and we'll get to.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. Yeah, but it was really cool because you could see as they briefly showed his background and him growing up that he really preferred snowboarding over everything else, and that was his true love, even from a very young age. And I believe it was 8th grade, or when he was around the age of 15, he actually convinced his parents to allow him to move with Adam out to Mammoth in California. And I believe he was homeschooled most of the time, and he would actually flip his schooling to where he would do all of his courses and whatnot during the summer, so he could actually take the winter off and just be constantly snowboarding day in and day out and doing every competition that he could really get into. So again, that's just another level of commitment and shows his love for the sport as well.
Also noting, Adam was a professional snowboarder before Kevin, and that's a huge influence to why he ended up going the route he did. So
Correct.
Adam actually was competing with Shaun White before Kevin, but we'll also get to that a little bit later on.
So Kevin came onto the professional snowboarding stage in 2005 at the age of 18, and he was quickly like became the guy that everybody was watching for on the mountain. And then I believe Shaun White came along, and Shaun White actually turned pro at the age of 13. And they were fast friends, but at the same time they were rivals. But for a long time they were really good friends that really just enjoyed competing against each other, because they both pushed each other to be just better at snowboarding overall, and they always were constantly trying to one up each other.
And at the time, they're hanging out outside of snowboarding too. They always reference playing basketball together or doing something outdoors together. They developed a relationship over time that the sport led them to.
Yes, very true, very true. Now, fast forward a little bit. Shaun White in 2006 actually had an undefeated season. Like every competition he competed in, he won. And at the Olympics, every event that he was in, he won. Yeah, Shaun White just swept it. Everything he was in, he won gold, and he just absolutely dominated.
Doing what Shaun White does.
Exactly. The flying tomato, as they call him.
The robot.
The robot.
Referenced as a robot. The machine.
Just an absolute animal on the snowboarding scene. Then actually in 2007, this is kind of where the relationship broke up a little bit because things became real serious. In 2007, at the Nippon Open in Japan, Kevin actually took the competition from Shaun White, and Shaun White placed second. Kevin got first. And it was funny in the documentary, one of his buddies, I think it was one of the Matrani brothers, they said they got a phone call from someone and they told him that Kevin won, and Matrani's immediate reaction was like, oh, like what happened? Did Shaun White fall, or like what was the case there? And like, no, just Kevin landed a better run. Like everybody's just so shocked whenever Shaun White loses.
Just stuck a better landing.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Outperformed him.
Yeah. So after the competition, it's funny, they talk about this story. Shaun White apparently was a little salty. He got a little drunk. And when Kevin Pearce and his other buddy, I think it was Scotty. It was one of the other guys. I don't remember if it was Scotty or not. They went back to their rooms, and apparently Shaun White had just fire extinguished both of their rooms, just hosed it completely down. And then Shaun White even apparently kicked Kevin Pearce out of his own house because they were living together at the time, and he kind of put his stuff on the curb and I guess had him find a new place to live. So that really started their bitter rivalry between each other, and kind of, I guess I wouldn't say ended the friendship, but it became more of an acquaintance situation, at least for a long time.
And I don't believe it was Scotty.
It was Mason Aguirre.
It was Mason?
Yeah,
that's
it was
right.
Mason Aguirre, because he called out Shaun White on the documentary and said, Shaun, if you're watching this, you broke my laptop that night, because he
that's right.
Said he
put
got
the extinguisher all over his laptop too, and he said he torched it. So
brand new Mac.
That's right. He was
Brand
pissed
new.
about that.
Hey, those were expensive at the time.
Yeah, dude. God.
Still are.
Yep, still are. At the time, though, this was a big purchase.
Yeah, of course. But anyway, at this point, I wanted to ask you guys, because I know there's kind of like a stipulation with Shaun White about how a lot of people in Colorado, I feel like people either love him or hate him. And I feel like a lot of people in Colorado kind of have that feeling that he was always a guy that was in it just to win and kind of selfish and really only thought about himself, and, didn't really embody like the purity of snowboarding or the spirit of it. So I just kind of wanted to ask your guys' opinion. Like, what's your opinion on Shaun White?
Growing up, I was always a huge fan of Shaun White. I always wanted him to do well. I didn't know a lot of the backstory of how he was very independent and wasn't always super willing to include others. So kind of seeing that more in the documentary too, seeing Kevin being a little more down to earth is kind of interesting, but it just shows how Shaun White was really in it to win everything, like super dedicated. And I mean, he created his own half pipe in Silverton, secluded from everybody, private to him, only person allowed to use it. And then Kevin Pearce gets a Nike 6.0 deal where they build him the same half pipe and he invites everybody. He's like, come on, guys, let's practice. So it just kind of shows the difference there.
Two different styles.
And maybe that's just comfortability. Maybe Kevin Pearce is just more comfortable when he's around his buddies when they're trying to push that limit and go to the next level and throw down that next trick. Maybe they just help each other out better. And Shaun White just would rather be him and his coach, his snowboarding coach, and really get down to the nitty gritty
Mhm.
and focus on that next move. And eventually it really paid off for him, clearly, to see how fast the sport progressed.
For
So
sure.
it's hard to say one is better than the other because there's both positives there. And it's also hard when you're competing at that high of a level and you're going back and forth with somebody you grew up with, and the media is always throwing your name around and putting you on covers of magazines saying, oh, you might actually be better than him now.
Yeah.
Seeing that as maybe Shaun White, that probably puts a little bit of a chip on your shoulder when you've been performing at a high level for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation to navigate, as a competitor. What do you think, Ryan? What's your opinion on Sean?
Yeah, my opinion is I was always a big fan, and I think his motivation of kind of being secluded was how he grew up and just got a ton of media coverage off the bat. And as soon as he started winning something when he was young, it was right to having to be that guy. And then Kevin was kind of the step up to where he wasn't the guy, but he could be the one to overdo that guy. And that was his motivation. So I didn't know a ton about Kevin at the time because I was so young, but I already knew Sean. He was so big already. And then getting to know Kevin Pearce's story is just like, wow, he was kind of doing the same thing. He got into his head to where he had to be the number one person. And then obviously the injury is kind of where his mindset takes him.
Yeah.
And it's super easy to get caught up in that competition when it's literally, all right, we're on to the next competition. We're on to the next competition. We're on to the next trick. We're on to the next move. We're driving to Utah. We're driving to Colorado. What is he doing now? What am I doing next? And looking back when they interview Sean, it looks like he almost has a little bit of regret at the time, thinking like, man, maybe we should have kind of savored those moments a little bit longer because we did have the same talent. And it's unique to be able to share that with somebody at that high of a level.
For sure. And going back to what you said, Ryan, for Sean White and his defense too, like you said, how he was kind of shoved in the spotlight at a young age. Like I said earlier, he became a professional snowboarder at the age of 13. Can you imagine being that young and a professional in a sport?
Yeah, they show clips of him competing against grown men, and he's just this little kid having fun.
Yeah. He talks about like wanting to play Pokemon or something with him, and they're all like 20 years old wanting to go drink, and he just like talks about how he didn't fit in. So yeah, of course he's a loner, you know? And being a super competitive person myself, I also like get the desire to want to win everything. I hate when I lose in anything, whether it's like a baseball game, air hockey, just anything. Like I get the competitive drive and like the wanting to be great. So I understand why he did all that stuff. So I'm team Sean White. I don't think he's a dick for any of those reasons. I think he just wanted to win, dude, and I get it.
It's also like the Olympic part of it too, because if he's Team USA, he's got a whole country on his back, and he's thinking, "Oh, I got to represent them too."
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's just so much pressure to be great that he's had his entire life.
Right.
Entire life. Describing how he performs tricks in an interview at the age of 13 is not what all 13-year-olds are doing.
No, dude, it's insane what that guy was able to do. So I'm definitely team Sean White. I don't think he was. I understand the other side of it though. A lot of people just snowboard for like the purity of it and the spiritual connection to like the land and the mountain and stuff, like the Jeremy Jones philosophy, right? And
Right.
so like I see both sides, but the competitor in me also wants to win. So I mean,
Right.
it could go either way.
And we know Sean likes that too. It's just a different level when it's referring to competition all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
Hit the mountain with his family or his buddies too. I mean, that's how he grew up and that's how he got into the sport. for sure, but just getting thrown into the ring of fire that quick shifts the mindset quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
Switches the approach and sees the mountain in a different view than how the everyday skier, snowboarder sees it as, how are we going to get down this run?
Yeah.
Yeah, growing up, I always thought like the professional snowboard life would be so cool. They were talking about how they take classes, in the summer, and then they get to just snowboard every day in the winter. I thought that
Yeah.
was so cool.
Yeah, dude, that'd be awesome. But it's just a different life,
Completely different life, different lifestyle. And if you were 10, 11, and you hear somebody's going pro at 13, you're going to pay attention.
Of course.
There's a lot of eyes there.
Yeah. I mean, it's like child actors, dude. It's like throwing Macaulay Culkin on a snowboard, dude. It's like you wonder why, like, how people turn out the way they turn out. It's like, well, look at like what they were exposed to as a kid at a young age.
No doubt. And through it all, I mean, Shaun White, you could almost say he's comparative to LeBron James in a way, because he's always, for the most part, stayed pretty level-headed.
He's the GOAT of snowboarding.
I mean, you couldn't say it better.
Yeah. All right, let's get back into the story. So let's see, where were we? Oh, so we're up to 2007. At this point, as I kind of alluded to, it's really competition every single time between Shaun White or Kevin Pearce. Every single one that they're both in, one's taken first place, the other one's taken second place, and it's really going back and forth. They flip-flop in a lot of different competitions. But just to give a little bit of background on what Kevin won, through 2007 and 2008, Kevin earned back-to-back quarter-pipe victories at the Oakley Arctic Challenge, as well as 2 other air and style victories. And then at the end of 2008, he was actually deemed the TTR, or Ticket to Ride, champion. And then in 2009, in the Winter X Games, he won silver in the Superpipe, making him the front runner, really to be the main guy going for gold against Shaun White in the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver. And that was like the news story going into that Winter Olympics, and that's what everybody was focused on, was the battle that was going to take place between those 2 guys on the half pipe.
And that silver medal, too, that Kevin got in that 2009 Winter X Games, there was a lot of question marks there. A lot of the announcers were saying that Kevin actually threw down the better run. Shaun just somehow ended up getting the higher score.
Yeah, and they said Kevin got bigger air and landed the same tricks, basically. I don't think it was the exact same tricks, obviously, but, I do remember seeing that in the documentary. They briefly spoke about that.
So they knew he was right there. They knew he was...
For
he
sure.
was definitely giving him a run for his money.
For sure. So that's the lead up to 2009, going into the 2010 Winter Olympics. Now, just to give a little background on Kevin's Friends crew. They called themselves the Friends crew, FRENDS, because they always said that there's no I in Friends. And again, that kind of goes back to Kevin's philosophy of really wanting to share snowboarding with everybody that he loved. And the guys that were in the crew were guys like Mason Aguirre, Scotty Lago, Danny Davis, Jack Matrani, and Luke Matrani. That was his name? That was the other brother? Luke? Okay.
I believe it's Scotty Lego, too.
I said Scotty Lago. Is it Lago or Lego?
I believe it's Lego.
Is it? Okay. Well, I messed that up. I apologize. But yeah, and he was the most successful out of those guys by far. Anyway, that was his crew that he always just went to the mountains with.
And Shaun was
always with them
in some of that too.
Yeah.
He was present in a lot of those times they were all together as well. So it wasn't like he was always butting heads with these guys all the time.
No, it's just when it really came time to compete, Shaun was Shaun,
He turned that mask on.
Yeah, he's going to do his own thing. Anyway, so in preparation for the upcoming Winter Olympics, like you said earlier, Shaun White spent like $2 million building his own half pipe. where he was the only one allowed to ride it. And he even made his girlfriend at the time sign a non-disclosure agreement not to give away the tricks that he was working on while he was doing that.
In the heart of Silverton, Colorado.
Yes, sir. And he added a foam pit onto it too, which was interesting.
You had to take a chopper just to get there.
Yeah.
So this was pretty hidden.
Yeah. So it's his own little playground just for him. And then, like you said too, Kevin signed that deal with Nike and got his own half pipe, and he brought the whole crew with him. And it was kind of cool. In the documentary, they said that Kevin was actually one of the first guys to implement the airbag versus the foam pit. And you kind of see that on the half pipe that Nike built for him. They put that airbag in to where they could really try new tricks with it, just as a safety precaution before they attempted it on snow.
Right. And motocross had a huge influence on this too. Motocross stepping up and doing backflips and Indian Air backflips, Superman backflips. Nitro Circus had probably a pretty big influence on this too with Travis Pastrana. But a lot of stepping the sport up of snowboarding was influenced by motocross too.
For sure. And, the reason that people also were taking these extra safety precautions for snowboarding and half pipe is because over the years that they had they would increasingly raise like how high the half pipe would get to, and they just actually bumped it up to 22 feet for this specific Olympic Games, and that was going to be the new height of the half pipe. And Kevin briefly has an interview and talks about how what the new half pipe like regulations and whatnot are going to do for the sport, and how it just screams for people just wanting more big air, more big tricks, just really always pushing the limits. And that's kind of the goal of increasing the dynamics of the half pipe, because it used to start out, I believe, at like 6 to 8 feet high, and it evolved to these 22-foot monsters that you see now.
22 footers.
That's not an easy gradual jump. That's straight to it. You're going 8 to 22.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I usually get like 2 feet of air, and now he's getting 24 feet of air.
Yeah, dude. Like, it's just insane. So there's all these new safety precautions that really need to be taken place just to try to at least keep these guys safe.
And I believe it still sticks at 22 feet today.
It is. I looked right before we got on here. It is. And I believe probably a lot of Kevin's story and then what happened with Sarah Burke as well probably had something to do with them relaxing a little bit on increasing height.
And the length, if you're curious, is 600 feet. So 22 feet high, 600 feet. That's as much range as you have to throw down whatever you can within that half pipe.
Right. All right. So during this time in 2009, everybody's practicing on their own half pipes. And during this time of half pipe snowboarding, the main trick that is really being put on the map that almost all of them believe that they need to land in order to compete at the Olympics is a version of a double cork. So that's really what Shaun White, Kevin, and all these guys were practicing. You want to explain kind of what a double cork is, Tyler? I think you probably know it a little bit better than I do.
Yeah, so the double cork, it's an off-axis rotation. And if the trick is double cork because there's, I believe, 3 spins and 2.5 flips. I might be incorrect on that. Hold on one second. Okay, so the front side approach is spinning 2.5 times while flipping twice. The triple cork, the 1440 front side triple cork is spinning 3.5 times while flipping 4 times.
Yeah. And that's where we're at today. That's what I was going to talk about too. So back then in 2009, the trick to land was like a double cork of some kind or some variation. And today, the sport of of snowboarding has evolved to the point where these Hirano brothers are throwing down triple corks.
Almost getting 30 feet of air each time.
Those guys fly so high. It is insane the amount of air that those guys get. I can't believe it. It's ridiculous.
A dangerous amount.
Yeah, and I think one of the Hirano brothers was the first to ever land a triple cork in competition, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think Sean White landed like one and practiced it just in practice, but it wasn't during a competition. And I don't think he ever landed one in comp. So while these guys are all practicing, they're all really working on their double corks and whatnot. And Kevin, before his major injury, his major TBI injury, he actually suffered a broken ankle on a fall that I actually thought looked way gnarlier than the one where he had his brain injury on. Do y'all remember seeing that in the documentary?
Oh yeah, that one looked so rough.
That one looked horrible.
He landed on the edge of the half pipe and it almost shot him across the half pipe.
Yeah. So after that happened, he spent pretty much the whole 2009 summer kind of just rehabbing that injury and just getting back to form. But he was still gonna he was still hopeful of making the Olympics, and that injury shouldn't. He wasn't thinking that injury was going to hold him back any. Anyway, so on December 27th, 2009, this was their first day of practice, and this is when they got to Aspen because they had heard that there was like a gnarly half pipe that was really going to be just for them to practice before the Olympics. Well, they showed up and just kind of did a couple runs through just to kind of feel out the half pipe, and they were, to say the least, disappointed in it. They talked about how it wasn't up to their standards, and the sides were rough, and there was like a curb down the middle of it, so they didn't like the way the half pipe turned out. So they decided to actually pack up their gear and head to Park City, Utah, where they had a feeling that they could possibly find a better half pipe for their training.
And for those curious about a curb in the half pipe has a smooth, almost half circle like finish to it at the bottom where it should be a smooth transition. And this one had almost an obtuse angle going into almost a flat surface that could have resulted in a much worse crash.
Yeah, so yeah, it just wasn't up to their standards, and they said it sucked overall and decided to pack it up.
Which for Aspen, that's super disappointing.
Yeah, because it's one of the like elite places to go snowboarding. So
premier for X Games, been premier for Dew Tour for a long time.
Yeah,
it's pretty well known, especially Aspen Buttermilk, for competitions there.
For sure. Right. So they show up to Park City, and right when they get there, they actually celebrate which Matrani brother? Was it Luke?
Jack.
It was Jack. Sorry. They celebrate Jack. Yeah.
21st birthday.
Celebrate Jack Matrani's 21st birthday. And Sean White's actually there partying with him. You could see him in the video as well. Everybody's there. They're all just having a good time. And
Sean White, Danny Davis, Scotty Lego,
the whole Friends crew, and Sean White, basically, all those guys. And so they wake up the next day. Kevin Pearce is like on the bike warming up. He's talking about how everybody's hungover except him because he's been up training hard. And he's just ready for the day. He's talking about how it's going to be a great day, and they're just ready to get after it and really get to training on the half pipe there. So this is 49 days before the Olympics, and right before, it was about 9:30 a.m. right before one of them drops in, him and his buddy Jack Matrani. They're both trying to decide who goes first, who's going to try the double cab cork first. And to determine this, because they talked about how they were both nervous, to determine this, they decided to play a game of rock, paper, scissors, which Kevin proceeds to lose. So Kevin drops in, and very first try on his cab double cork, he what looks like over rotates and Just doesn't stop himself with his hands, nothing, just pretty much just directly lands on his face and is instantly out cold, like no body movement, nothing. He's just out cold on the slopes. And yeah. So everybody kind of rushes to his side. They're all just trying to talk to him, waiting for him. Scotty, I believe, is the guy that he ran and got ski patrol immediately. He was telling them that they're going to need a helicopter like as fast as possible because Kevin's out. And
which thankfully he saw that.
Yeah, like they all knew. They all talked about how like they knew immediately like it was bad. Like one of the guys even says like that's one of the worst like he's ever seen.
It knocked completely unconscious, not moving. They said he wasn't breathing on his own either.
No, he probably. They said that. I don't remember them saying that he wasn't breathing. I think he just had shallow breaths or like it was irregular because that's typically what happens with TBIs.
They ended up saying that, I think, as they were transitioning him to the hospital. Anyway. They might have said that a little too early in the documentary, but they said eventually he wasn't breathing on his own.
Well, yeah, they put him on they intubated him. But anyway, yeah, they show a picture of Kevin when he's laying at the bottom of the half pipe, and he's got blood coming out of his nose and mouth, and he's got a massive bruise above the left eye, and that's pretty much looks where he came down and hit his head really hard. And so they chopper him out of there. They, like I said, they intubate him and just kind of get him ready for transport. And they get him, once they get him on the chopper, they get him to the hospital, I think in about 9 minutes, I believe is what they said.
Super quick.
Yeah, definitely. And now at this point, I just kind of wanted to talk about some emergency tips and a little bit about TBIs and kind of what the emergency crew was looking for and kind of what they probably did, and then just kind of what you can do as a bystander, even though like just basic tips for regular people if like an injury like this happens that you can do before professionals arrive. So let's see. So a TBI can be categorized as mild, moderate, or severe. And some of you might be wondering, like, what's the difference between a TBI and a concussion? Well, a concussion is basically just a mild TBI. And as you know, like concussions don't always knock you out, but you still have those kind of same kind of symptoms sometimes that you can get from a more serious TBI too. Let's see. So a severe one, like Kevin's, can really just be caused by like a contusion, which is bruising or swelling of the brain, a hematoma, which is pooling of blood within the brain, or like a laceration, which is like the tearing of brain tissue. And some things to look out for, like if you're there with somebody that like hits their head really hard and they're unconscious or something, there might be blood or clear fluid leaking out from their nose, mouth, or ears, which Kevin had. And if you're seeing clear fluid, that's a clear sign of cerebral spinal fluid leaking out, which is a certain brain fluid that kind of encapsulates your brain and keeps it.
Provides cushion to the brain.
Thank you.
Also helps deliver nutrients to the brain as well, but if it gets in excess, it can be highly dangerous for an individual that's undergoing a TBI.
Yes, correct. And if you're seeing that fluid, that's, like I said, a sign of a serious brain injury, and it could be the result of your brain herniating, which is your brain is like swelling to the point where it's pushing out everything else that has been providing your brain cushion to your skull. Because there's always a little bit of space between your brain and your skull, and that's that fluid that's kind of in between that area. So if your brain's herniating, that's what's going on. It's pushing that fluid out. And that also in turn increases your ICP, or your intracranial pressure. And some other typical signs really to look for. If they are awake, there could be weakness or paralysis, just a decrease mental status or even, unresponsiveness, like we saw with Kevin. Um, could be vomiting and unequal pupils. So that's another thing that they talked about in the documentary that they saw pretty much right away. Is I think it was Scotty was talking about how they noticed that like one of his pupils was like just completely blown out, which just tells me that one pupil covered his whole eye pretty much, and one pupil was probably about normal size, and that is a clear sign of again like massive brain trauma. There could also
majority on the left side too. So it's left side eye.
Yes, correct.
Sustained trauma, majority to the left side of the skull.
Yes. Then some other signs and symptoms could be just abnormal breathing, which is why they needed to intubate him and basically breathe for him. There could be a decrease in pulse, headaches, seizures, and then long term could be a personality change, like we'll get to eventually in the story. But that is another major thing that's very common in patients with severe TBIs. Now, just some tips on what you could do as a non-certified person just before 911 arrives or before somebody that's certified or licensed shows up. Obviously, call 911 immediately.
ASAP.
Just like they did. Scotty got ski patrol there quickly. They got a helicopter there as fast as they possibly could. Main thing you want to do, you could really try to stabilize that person's spine just by holding their head still, making sure that they're not moving around and just trying to keep everything in line. Because if someone is paralyzed or they have a crack in their spine or anything like that or a step off, the chances of them being permanently paralyzed increase if they're continued to allowed to move around and whatnot. They just have a higher risk of hurting it even worse. So that's something that you could do. Just really, and if they're awake, it's just basically trying to tell them not to move until the professionals show up as well. And in the case of like possibly you thinking maybe they might have a skull fracture or something like that, you also don't want to put too much pressure on their head, because the worst thing you could probably do is like really squeeze it to try and hold their spine tight, because you all incidentally might push like a piece of skull into the brain and further injure them more. So you really just want to be kind of gentle, but still just kind of keep everything straight up and down. If they're unconscious like Kevin, you could always check pulse, check their breathing. And if they aren't breathing and there's no pulse, that means they've gone into cardiac arrest, and somebody should start CPR. And if nobody knows how to do CPR, typically if you're on the phone with 911, they'll walk you through it to at least start doing compressions before you can hand it over to the professionals once they show up.
That goes with further medical emergencies too. If there's other injuries, dispatch will walk you through that.
Yeah, until the proper authorities show up, right? Because you were a dispatcher.
Correct.
Yeah.
Dispatcher in Durango, Colorado, La Plata County. So if there's seizures, if you have any questions at all, a medical dispatcher will walk you through the step-by-step process on what to do with confidence too, and make sure that you do the right thing.
For sure. And that's a great segue, because I was about to talk about seizures next. In cases like this, the person could be seizing, and in the event of that, you want to restrain from holding them. You don't want to hold them at all. You want to let them move as much as they can. You don't want to try, like I said, talked about keeping their spine straight. You want to just let go. If anything, just put your hands under their head as a cushion so they don't bang their head into the ground. And you just don't want to restrict their movement. And if there's anything close by that they could hurt themselves with, just get all objects and everything away from them. And basically just kind of let the seizure go on until they either stop or, again, professionals arrive and they can take over. You also, whatever you do, I know a common thing with seizure is too, you want to try to get their tongue from falling into the back of their throat so they don't choke or anything. But whatever you do, don't stick your finger in their mouth, because that is a quick way to get it bit off. Because if a person seizes and their jaw clenches, that finger's gone. You're not getting that back.
Hey, the finger is similar consistency of a carrot. So put 2 and 2 together. If you can bite through a carrot, you can bite through a finger.
Yeah.
How the nervous system works, though. The nervous system understands that that is your finger, and you do not want that thing snapped in half.
For sure. For sure. And then really the last thing that you could possibly do, if there is severe bleeding or fluid leaking from different orifices, you don't really want to block or compress it. You do want to let it come out, but you could also, if you have something, you could kind of just clean it up a bit. But you don't really want to block or compress those areas like you'd think you really would. And again, the last thing is really just be there and wait for the professionals really to arrive or take it from there. And maybe asking, what are my qualifications? Well, I was a former EMT, so I do know the emergency medical side of things. And that's kind of why I'm giving a little bit of advice here. And Tyler was a former 911 dispatcher as well. So we have some experience in this arena.
Police, fire, search and rescue, wildlife, you name it, animal control, state police.
All right. Well, that's enough for the emergency tips. We can get back to the story now. So once I get Kevin to the hospital, this is where kind of the real work goes into him. In order to relieve the pressure that was on his brain from his brain swelling and to alleviate the ICP, they put in a extraventricular drain in his head. And that's really just to kind of get the fluid out of there and just kind of decrease the pressure that's on his brain at the moment, and really just trying to decrease the swelling as well. And at this point, they call one of the, was it Mason that got the phone call from the hospital?
I believe it was Danny Davis that received the phone call.
Danny received the phone call from the hospital, and they said that they weren't sure when Kevin was going to wake up, or how long it would be, or the extent of the brain damage. But they said that he was stable, and they would really just have to wait like 3 to 5 days before they could see how much damage had been done. So following that, there's a couple people that were there like by his side throughout this whole experience. And that was obviously his mom and his dad. And his dad at this point talks about how the doc told him that there was, whenever they would look at the fluid that was draining from Kevin, the clearer the better. And he would constantly also be monitoring the intracranial pressure, or the ICP. And he said his dad would just sit there for weeks and weeks, just looking at the fluid and looking at the pressure, just constantly on watch for it, along with his mom. And his girlfriend Ellery also was there throughout this early stages of this process. He was in the neurocritical care unit for 26 days before he was moved to neuroacute care. And I got kind of some mixed things on his the precise like timeline of his coma. I saw things that said he was in a medically induced coma for 32 days. I saw one that said he was only in a coma for like 5 to 6 days or 26 days. But I think from most of the reports, I think it was probably about a month that he was in a medically induced coma. Did you kind of see that too?
I've heard 32 days. 32 days was a number that I've seen consistently.
Okay, cool.
But the day 26 was when he was moved to neuroacute from critical.
Yes, so at that point he's stable enough to be moved off the ICU. And at this point they really start seeing Kev kind of come back to life a little bit. Like he can start moving his hand a bit. He's opening his eyes. He's not really talking or communicating other than just opening his eyes and maybe moving his hand occasionally. One step that kind of was a positive moment for the family was also when they played a song. What was the name of that song that they played for him?
It was one of his favorite songs, and he was able to kind of go along with the tune of the beat and mouth the words.
Right. Yeah. But they saw that as a positive note, and they saw that he was making some improvement when he started singing one of his favorite songs that they were playing at the time. Um, and another little side story here that they talk about that was also just extremely sad. At the same time that Kevin was there in his coma, at the same time there was another skier who suffered a brain injury as well. That both of the families were kind of talking to each other and kind of checking in on each other throughout their kind of process. But unfortunately, while Kevin was still in his coma, this oh wait, I think I'm mixing up the story. Hang on.
The skier that had the accident in the hospital, they were kind of on the same timeline. And this isn't C.R. Johnson, who you're probably thinking of.
No, yeah, I just got mixed up in my notes. That's where I was.
This was just another skier who happened to have the same injury, similar, maybe not same exact injury, but the same timeline injury that unfortunately did not make it through the process. Same steps in the process and everything.
Yeah, and that family was obviously absolutely gutted. And Kevin's family talks about how it could have just as easily as been Kevin as well. So they were just gutted for that family as well. And then while Kevin was in a hospital too, the support for him was really pouring in, and then they started a whole campaign. The I Ride for Kevin campaign was really sweeping the nation at the time. There were stickers that every snowboarder and skier basically was wearing on everything, and there was always like these dedications for Kevin.
They had it on their bibs, they had it on their helmets, boards, you name it.
Everything.
They had a candle lighting for him too, I believe.
Yes.
Was that one of the competitions?
Yes, I believe so. And Ellery, as well as the rest of the family, she was with him in those early days. And a skier by the name of C.R. Johnson, who had suffered a TBI as well, I believe in 2005. I don't remember the exact date, but he was reaching out to Ellery, and he really just wanted to speak to Kevin and talk with him about it. And because he was just saying how nobody understands unless you're the one that's been through it, and he wanted to kind of help Kevin through the injury. But unfortunately, before Kevin was even out of his coma as well, C.R. Johnson suffered another TBI, and this one proved to be fatal while he was skiing, and he didn't make it through that one. It's just another sad moment in the sport.
Wear your helmet, please.
Yeah, for the love of God, wear a helmet. So at this point, Kevin's kind of really gone through the worst of it. And I believe it was 3 months out from his injury when he was finally released from the Craig Hospital and cleared to go home and then really start his long rehabilitation process. And almost immediately he starts talking to his girlfriend about wanting to try the trick again and getting back into snowboarding and trying to do another dap or a cab double cork. And she isn't really happy about it because she's a pro snowboarder too, and she understands the risk, but she doesn't want him to even snowboard ever again, let alone try a trick of that high level. And his family's kind of on board in the same aspect too. They don't want Kevin doing anything else to really possibly get hurt and suffer a second TBI, because they've seen from other stories now what a second one can do just from being in the hospital for those 30 days. And now at this point, going through the rehab process, we were introduced to his doctor, who is Alan Weintraub, and he's a neuro rehab specialist. And you see him throughout the documentary talking to Kevin and really helping him along with this progress and this long road of rehab. And the first time that I think we're really introduced to him is they're like having this dinner, and Kevin actually makes a toast, and he like gives a very full and clear sentence and clear toast as to how far he's come. I believe I think it was 5 or 7 months at this time, and his doctor is just stoked at this point on how far that he's come and how well he is able to talk again, because it took him forever to even just be able to say a word or two, and now he's completing full sentences again and standing up and walking, and it's really cool to see him go through that process and get to where he was. After I believe that 5 or 7 month period, he's kind of allowed to go back home, and he moves back to Heartland, Vermont on May 1st in 2010. So he moves back to Heartland, Vermont on May 1st in 2010, and he's back home with his family. And at this point, we start to see clips of him actually going to schools, speaking to kids about the importance of wearing helmets. And I just thought that was kind of a cool aspect of it, because he talks about how the helmet, even though he suffered, severe TBI, the helmet still is truly what saved his life. If he wasn't wearing a helmet, he was most likely dead. Actually, probably for sure. And throughout this time, he is also now arguing with his family kind of a lot about snowboarding again, and they're really just going back and forth on like what this process has really done to the family. And the real advocate that steps up in the documentary that really doesn't want Kevin doing anything like this again is his brother David. His brother David is the one with Down syndrome, and he just talks about his love for Kevin and how he's terrified that Kevin's going to die if he ever steps on a snowboard ever again, and he doesn't want to see Kevin. He doesn't want to see that happen to his brother, obviously. And at this point, I want to talk about David in and of himself a little bit, because, like I said earlier, he is an inspiring story inside of this inspiring story. He himself, growing up, participated in the Special Olympics, and you see clips of him throughout the documentary where he's actually, constantly winning medals in both skiing and swimming, and he was kind of the first Olympian in the family, actually, which I thought was really cool. And he has a quote that I thought kind of summed up his character really well. Let me find it.
They said that he was diagnosed with Down syndrome, but they said it should be called up syndrome for him because he's an up kind of guy, right?
Because he's an up kind of guy. Exactly. That's the exact quote I was going for. And I think that really just speaks volumes to David's character and how he's kind of been just kind of this light in this family. And it's really cool to see.
And he's super transparent. Like, he is able to really connect with how he's feeling and describes that very well throughout the documentary. And you can kind of tell, just growing up around that family, he's a huge competitor, and it showed in the Olympics. I mean, winning swimming events, winning skiing events, and not even really caring about the competition, so to say. He was just trying to do his best, and it ended up working out for the best for him.
Yeah, for sure. David was an awesome part of this story, and it goes to show again how much of a loving family that the Pearces are, really,
and showing huge concern for full spectrum what was taking place. He was very transparent with the family on his thoughts and his emotions, and discussed different scenarios on whether this could end his life too for Kevin. And just being an open voice made a huge difference, I believe, for handling that situation gracefully, not just for Kevin, but for probably his parents too, and his brother Adam, because Adam gets super emotional throughout the whole process.
Adam quits his full-time job, and his full-time job now is being there for Kevin throughout this difficult time, throughout this process.
Which, if you really understand the gravity of this situation, not a lot of people get that support daily, because this is a day in, day out rehabilitation approach. This isn't just, oh, we have it on Tuesday. This is we have to get up in the morning and we're hitting the ground running. So Adam made some big changes for Kevin that not a lot of people are able to experience in a situation like that. So that I think that made a huge difference for him and his process to overcome the situation.
Yeah, like you were saying, it's not like a typical arm injury or leg injury or whatever. 2 to 3 times a week you're going to rehab for 9 months and then you're healed. No, this is like an everyday process for years.
And this is controlling your sunlight exposure, your TV exposure, and at the time, not that big of a deal, but now cell phone exposure, driving. I mean, he's not driving at this point, but in the case of a brain injury, there's a lot of different things you have to take into account of. Even with a concussion, you have to watch whether you're taking the right pain reliever, ibuprofen or Tylenol. You also have to make sure that one, your sleep is monitored too in some circumstances. So it's a big approach that not a lot of people might think of, but there's a lot of things that go into it. Even my experience with concussions in school, I was typing papers at night with Oakley sunglasses on to minimize light exposure to my eyes to reduce symptoms quicker. And hydration too. Hydration goes a long way for brain recovery as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's not an easy process. Going through even just a concussion, which is a mild TBI, isn't an easy process either. And it just goes to show again, like the support, how lucky Kevin was to have the support system that he does to this day.
And understanding that within a TBI or a concussion, that there's a quote in there too that you have to be ready for the person he's going to be after the fact when he wakes up from the coma or recovers from the brain injury, because there is a lot of things that go into play, whether that's anxiousness or continuous fight or flight or depression or mood swings, bipolarism. There's a lot of different things that you have to take account of in order to handle this situation gracefully.
For sure. Yeah, that personality change, that's real, and a lot of families also really struggle with that after a family member has a TBI and they kind of have to take care of them.
And to the person who's undergoing it too, because then your quality of life is drastically changed very fast. You're not able to do everything that you're wanting to do immediately. Of course, he shows his passion to get back to snowboarding fairly fast, way faster than any other person probably would in that case scenario. But it goes all the way into wanting to return to the field from either a football injury or even soccer too. You have to really take your time and make sure this is the correct time frame to return to even everyday activities.
For sure. At this point, 7 months out from his injury, we see that he's actually skating and riding segways and stuff. So he's up and moving around, kind of doing normal activities again that he enjoys doing, but still no snowboarding at this point. And in one of the doctor visits, he actually shows the doctor a video of himself wake surfing about, at this point, I think it was a year after the injury, and him kind of falling and hitting the water kind of hard, which the doctor absolutely like freaks out on him. And he said that is just a one-way ticket to another TBI, because I think the statistic was a person with a concussion is like 10 times more likely to get another concussion than anybody else who hasn't had one before. And the doctor is very, upset with Kevin at this point, and he's really trying to get through his head that this is just the most risky behavior that Kevin can be involved in. And Kevin just really doesn't want to hear it, because these kind of sports and these kind of risky activities are just, they're part of who he is. And he just doesn't want to give it up because he loves it so much. And it's really just all he wants to do all day and every day. And the doctor is pretty much just telling him he can't, especially at this point. And he doesn't know if Kevin ever will be able to get to that point ever again to where he can do any of this stuff. And that really hits hard for Kevin at that moment, and he's just kind of defeated. And then the next thing, I think one of the more powerful scenes in the documentary is when we see him with his psychiatrist, with his brother Adam. And again, this is about a year out from his injury now. And Kevin's kind of having this moment where he's breaking down, he's crying, and he's talking about how he feels like this is never ending because it's just one thing after another. He just found out that he's going to have a couple eye surgeries to fix his eyes because he's still having terrible like double vision, and they're not working as well as they should be at this point. And he's just really kind of just feeling all these like feelings and stuff, and just he's super depressed and not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And the real tear-jerking part is when you see like the camera pans to Adam, and Adam's just sitting there and a single tear falls down his cheek and he's crying himself. And it's just a really emotional moment. That's the one that stuck out to me. What about you guys?
I mean, it's an everyday thing. He's even wearing filtered glasses for the most part of this process, to where it's not even just a normal prescription set of like eyeglasses. This is filtered to where there's clearly restrictions, and you got to take account of peripherals. He might not even be able to see peripherally as well. So there's more to it than just saying his eyes aren't technically operating correctly. And we'll get into this a little bit more later, how this affects the brain and how this also affects your movement, whether you're controlling your joints properly or your balance. And there's a lot of science to it that we'll talk about later on. And then just the day in and day out of having a full medication regimen, making those changes daily, lifestyle changes that you might have not had to think about beforehand, that has more gravity to it. Diet, even eating the correct foods to help reduce inflammation in the brain as much as possible, because if that gets out of hand, then symptoms start to spiral downward as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, it's just a day in and day out thing, and he's just not seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. And it's just obviously really hard on him and whatnot. Fast forward a little bit to, let's see, 2 years out, his 2-year evaluations, he goes into, I think it's a different doctor at this point, and they start looking at the scars on his brain. And I thought this was an interesting scene as well, just because he's talking about what his brain looks like and the scar tissue that he compares Kevin's brain to a lot of those NFL running backs. And he just really emphasizes how much better Kevin's brain looks, even compared to those guys' brains, which blew my mind as far as like the personality change and whatnot that you see Kevin going through. His brain is still technically better than most NFL running backs, which is just absolutely wild.
And this is where, one, we need to take account of the scar tissue location. It's heavily dense in his midbrain, and we'll talk about why that's important later. But I also think that due to his level of competitiveness of where he was, we've talked about how he might be top 2% in the world at this time before the injury, where he probably had the best proprioception, like awareness of your body and your joints and your movement in space, probably out of anybody in the world. And there's so much that goes into that from a brain activity standpoint that could potentially have set him further on down the road in a positive setting prior to the injury, that makes that difference for him being able to say that his brain is in a better spot than majority of, not maybe not majority of NFL running backs, but being able to have that documentation to compare and still seeing that he's in a better spot compared to professional athletes that are still competing is super impressive to see.
Right. And like you said, it really depends on where that scar tissue is located in the brain, on the certain symptoms and effects that you see. in day-to-day life.
And when somebody's so accustomed to doing a 1080 or a 900, football players aren't doing that necessarily. It's very one-dimensional, one-cut, like lateral movement. They're not spinning 1,080 degrees or doing double backflips. So this is where I think his brain development is further on down the road compared to the average person that
I don't
gives
know,
him
dude.
more of an
I
advantage
see
in
him
this
scoring
situation.
I see him scoring touchdowns and celebrating, doing backflips and stuff. I don't know.
Not to that extent.
You don't think
No
Tyreek Hill
shot.
could do a 1080?
I will say a backflip wearing shoulder pads and a helmet is super impressive, but I don't think it compares at altitude where you're battling gravity and the thin air and trying to, one, catch your breathing correctly, adjusting to the altitude, and still being able to throw down a 1080 or a double backflip or a 540.
Yeah. No, I see
It's
what
hard
you're
to
saying.
compare with all the circumstances.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, the more you use a muscle, the bigger the muscle gets, basically.
Or the higher functioning it gets, the more resilient it is, the better, you could say, elasticity, or maybe not for this situation, but more, I would say, faster to adapt to skills where neuroplasticity comes in, and neurogenesis, the ability to change your DNA with stressing your system as well.
Basically, after that 2-year visit, Kev is still really only talking about snowboarding still. And at this point, his family really kind of decides to have a bit of an intervention for him. If you remember that Thanksgiving dinner, and this is kind of that pivotal, like, emotional moment with David as well, where they all kind of say their piece, but David kind of takes over the conversation, talking about how he doesn't want to see not only Kevin just not die, but like he doesn't even want to see Kevin in a wheelchair, and he thinks that's where he's going if he continues to snowboard. And as they're talking through it, they kind of even have a breakthrough moment with David where Kevin talks about how he's trying to cope with the fact that he has to understand that he can't do a lot of what he used to be able to do. And then their mom kind of points out to David that, maybe hearing Kevin kind of come to that realization and kind of accept it, maybe he can kind of accept and try to cope with his Down syndrome a little bit more, because David seems to get really down about it sometimes. Like you said, he's very transparent about his struggle as well. And he says, because of like what Kevin said, that he's willing to try. And that was a real breakthrough moment, I think, with the whole Pearce family. And I thought that was a cool moment.
Yeah, the communication there goes a long way.
Now, fast forward to December 2011. This is the day that Kevin has finally convinced everyone that it's going to be his first day back on the snowboard. Another cool thing, before you even see him get out on the mountain, you see him pack on all his sponsor stickers and stuff. His sponsors stuck with him through this whole thing. That's like Amp, Burton, Nike, Volvum, and the Friends sponsor. And it's just really cool to kind of see that those sponsors really sticking with him through it. And as they get up to the mountain, they have a bit of a moment together. And Jake Burton even goes snowboarding with him on the first time, which I thought was really cool. And we just kind of go through his whole first run. And he fell a couple times, but he still looked pretty good, honestly, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, if he's riding straight, it looks pretty good to me.
Yeah.
And the neurologist actually covers this pretty well too, of like, maybe you think you're able to do these things, but when you're actually out there, this is a completely different story. And given the time frame, this is helpful for him that he's at least waited this long to trying and accomplish this feat, because there is a huge difference between actually getting that process from the brain to your body and adjusting to the elements too.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's like he in his mind he knows what he's been able to do before, and he expects his body to be able to do it too, but the connection isn't quite there anymore. But for someone with a severe TBI like that, I was still pretty impressed with that run. He felt just as much as I do. Like it was pretty cool to see. And then so that was kind of the start of his reintroduction into snowboarding. And then he does something that none of the family wanted him to do, but he didn't tell the family about. Is he actually entered the Mount Baker bank slalom competition, and you know you see him ride, and it's just really not up to the level of the professionals. And he talks about it, how he was really bummed with his riding, and it's just not good enough. And you see him fall a little bit on his butt throughout the race. So he talks about how maybe events aren't for him anymore, and how he can't really kind of get up to that riding standard. And I think that's the moment where he finally starts to kind of come around to accepting it a little bit more. But yeah, and that's a difficult thing for him, because throughout this too, he talks about his love for the sport, and that's the reason that he's willing to risk everything, because he iterates that like nobody in the family really loves anything the way that he loves snowboarding, and that's all he wants to do day in and day out, which is why he's continuously been pushing to get back into it like this. And it's just kind of, he can kind of just be a casual rider now, but it looks like at this point, like that's really it,
And that's hard to accept too, because what that does for him in terms of endorphin release and adrenaline, it carries a lot more weight when you're just unable to perform at that level. So level of acceptance for that situation for his long-term health is probably beneficial, but something to definitely cope with, which is why having a therapist or somebody to talk to through a situation like this is super important.
They also mentioned like how all these athletes don't really get support for when they do get injured. Like you said, all the promotions that he got sponsors, I don't know if they even helped him out, but if the other athletes didn't, maybe they didn't either, or he didn't either.
And a lot of insurances actually decline skiing or snowboarding or motorcycle riding, anything related to extreme sports. Some insurances won't cover that by any means because there's too much risk involved.
And that's kind of the other big underlying issue that the documentary The Crash Reel wants to get behind, is that all these big extreme sports guys, they all have a crash reel of them and their biggest falls and wipeouts and stuff. It's because they say like that's what people want to see. And that's the problem with these sports, like really pushing the limits with like increasing half pipe size, ramp size, or whatever. They want to see not only the insane tricks in big air, but they also want to see the big falls and wipeouts. And that's when some of the Friends crew, Scotty, the
And
two
Danny
Matroni
Davis,
brothers, Danny Davis, and they start talking about all their injuries. One of them says that he's broken 26 bones and he's only 24 years old. Another one shattered his back and pelvis. Another one slammed his head, broke his, like, it just goes on and on.
lacerated spleen.
Lacerated spleen. Yeah, dude. Like it went on and on how serious these injuries are. And the one, yeah, it's a real issue with these extreme sports. And the proper care that they need doesn't always get paid for, especially by insurance. And Kevin, I believe, was just lucky in the fact that he did have money, and I believe that his family had money because his dad has his own business and a couple other side businesses as well, if I remember correctly. So Kevin really was able to get like the proper care that he needed, but not everybody can afford it, and not everybody gets to have that support.
Yeah, Kevin was lucky because he won all those competitions, and then he even went to a house that he bought and didn't even realize it was his house. He went back to Carlsbad, I think it was.
Yeah, yeah, in California. He completely forgot he bought that house, and then he talked about how exciting it was to see it again for the first time. Kevin, to this day, that's really, as far as we see, he gets back on the snowboard, and I believe he casually rides now, and this is still kind of an ongoing process, even 15 years later.
He
And
100% casually rides now. He surfs as well. He's getting back to more the speed of the lifestyle he wants to live, just not at that level of competitiveness that he's previously exposed to. So it's a different lifestyle, but he's still adding more of it to what his interests are, which is awesome to see.
yeah, definitely. He's come a very long way, and it's really cool what he's doing with his life now. Now he's a business owner, a motivational speaker, a health and fitness coach, and I believe I saw somewhere that he's also like a Down syndrome advocate, and he helps out with like charities and stuff like that. So that's really cool to see. He has his own company called Love Your Brain that focuses on yoga and helping TBI patients out. So he's really kind of come full circle and kind of accepts his injury now and really just wants to help improve other people's quality of life after they've suffered an injury like this. So that's kind of cool to see where his story kind of wraps up here and where he's going.
So reintroducing myself, I'm Tyler once again. I've been a exercise physiologist for over 4.5 years, and I've seen a lot of different cases that have not come to this extent of this traumatic brain injury, but I've seen different things that have required vestibular rehabilitation and things that have required similar protocols. So we're going to talk about some of this process and break it down through a rehab approach as well. Yeah, so branching off of the story of Kevin Pearce and his process with his development overall, coming from a very high level of competition to his traumatic brain injury, TBI, as we've referenced, there's a lot that really goes into how he's even able to live the lifestyle he is right now. And we'll break that down through more of the phases that took place in initial rehab and protocols to make sure he's stabilized, to the acute phase. We'll break it down all the way down to how he recovered, to what kind of rehabilitation protocols took place and why they're important. So his rehab journey was super well documented. It still is today. And it's important to note that a lot of these specific details have evolved and changed. But for TBIs, a lot of this stuff is still super important to be able to make that transition from critical to acute, and then also maintenance phases too. It involves a multidisciplinary medical team and an approach that takes a lot of time and grace and patience too. There's a lot of safety that should be involved. It should be a gradual progression, and it should be personalized and tailored to the individual as well, because not everybody's the same. We talk about how Kevin was roomed with somebody who had the same exact injury, so to say, but that person ended up unfortunately passing away, and Kevin was able to be one of the lucky ones to gradually make that rehabilitation plan and come back to his day-to-day life. So we'll get into that with a general overview on how this would typically unfold for case to case. So the first phase is a critical phase, of course, and this is where we see him hit the ground. So that's taking place as he hits the ground, and you see the bleeding. You see him have the medical team rushing to him. The medical team has to address the issues immediately, and this goes right into emergency care and stabilization of the body and the person. And this is typically 0 to 72 hours, which that progression is kind of skewed because technically Kevin was in the critical phase for almost 26 days before he actually goes to acute. So this is why this is such an intricate case, just because he was in a coma for almost 32 days and 26 until he made it to acute. So there's a lot of gravity to this. And he was facing life-threatening issues. The main thing is that vital signs are stable. First thing that we want to see is that there is breathing, there is a heartbeat, and then there's no secondary injuries, which if you're watching the documentary, you see him in a neck brace, you see him in a knee brace, you see him in a neck brace for quite some time too, and that goes back into the stabilization. But the diagnostic imaging that has to take place super fast, the CT scans, the MRIs, they have to kind of diagnose the extent of the brain injury to take the proper protocol. So then we kind of branch into neurosurgical interventions, and this isn't always going to take place, but this can happen in an event of a traumatic brain injury too. And we talked about the external ventricular drain that his mom actually had to approve of that scared the life out of her, which is more of the temporary method to drain cerebrospinal fluid out of the brain. And you'll see that in the documentary too. You see the thin tube that comes out of his head, and it actually goes into a bag to make sure that intracranial pressure is maintained and under control. And you see him wear that all the way up and through acute care too, when he is walking around and trying to get back on his feet. So there was an excess of cerebrospinal fluid that took place in this situation that lasted for well over a month. And like we talked about before, this is more so to make sure that the ventricles in the brain and the fluid that flows through the brain and the spinal cord are able to function properly for the most part, and that the spinal fluid can still provide proper cushioning and nutrients to the brain and spinal cord too. So if there's anything in excess, this could be severe and almost life-threatening. So this is why this was a very important protocol for this to take place. It potentially saved his life, because if this gets blocked or creates any further pressure in the brain, it could potentially end your life. So the EVD, the external ventricular drain, was a huge portion of this process that made this possible. The amount that drained, we probably don't need to know, but it was probably a good amount. And it was probably adjusted quite a bit too. So the nurses and the doctors had a great approach into solving this situation. And like I said, not even potentially saved his life point blank.
Yeah, it's really hard to get all the details when it comes from a medical sense, like by case, just because of HIPAA laws and stuff. So we can we're just kind of go into the, typical rehab that you'd see and whatnot. So we're not going to have exact details, but yeah, you know what I mean? Because you couldn't really find the exact, like you can't find like medical reports and stuff like that.
We're not going to get that exact number, but it was probably a great amount.
Yeah, for sure.
From just watching the documentary and the additional YouTube videos and things of that nature. But once they get into more ICU, they're still monitoring everything. You see his dad monitoring technically the inflammation that's taking place in the brain, and that has to be under control, as well as any other associated injuries. Luckily, I don't think there is too many excessive injuries in terms of broken bones or anything for him, but he did experience some blood clots. He had a blood clot in the arm, which there's a couple different ways that could be fixed through catheters and different surgical procedures that help remove the blood clot, which is a thrombectomy. Thrombectomy, you can try and pronounce that a couple times if you want to.
No, that's good. You nailed it.
We try our best over here. But the acute rehabilitation phase, this is very a very gradual process. And this is kind of more so introducing a lot of cognitive therapy too. So making sure speech is there, making sure eye response is there. Doctors are going to do this exam to where they can check the patient's eyes and make sure there's no present tumors or nystagmus that could indicate further surgical intervention too. And this should be done if you ever go see a chiropractor or an orthopedist or somebody like that, so to say. But very gradual process of cognitive and physical therapy in the acute phase. This is more so very light mobility training, getting used to moving the joints, getting the tissue activated, and slowly getting into balance and coordination. Sometimes this can be done laying down, sometimes this can be done seated as well, if applicable. But there's adaptive strategies to be able to get to these goals, and that is case to case. So that's why it has to be tailored for people too. Psychological support, if the person is responsive, this should happen pretty quickly. There should be some communication that the patient should receive from a therapist. I would at least recommend it. Not saying this is all medical advice, but it is beneficial for sure to have this take place, because there is a huge change in lifestyle there. And then continual medical follow-ups is imperative, just knowing what the needs of the patients are and getting them to the point where they can be independent. Another thing building up to that is community reintegration. So having a community around yourself and not being isolated, whether that is inpatient rehab or having somebody in the same room as you, if you are doing inpatient hospital rehab too, that could be going through similar experiences. If you're able to do home-based exercises, having that community and support around you is huge too, which is why Adam being able to take time off of his job for over a year and being there for Kevin and changing his rehab approach to something that's more inclined to his competitive spirit made a huge difference.
Yeah, Kevin literally says at some point in the documentary as well that Adam like brought him back to life. And if it wasn't for Adam, like who knows where Kevin would have even been to this day. Adam was a very key part in his rehabilitation process.
And that's why I believe it's super important that if you are in a situation like this, you are vocal about your goals, or at least let people know where you want to go with your current situation and what your end goal is. Because there's good teams out there that'll tailor things to your end goal and get you to that point. And for this kind of situation, memory and attention to detail, executive functions of the brain is very important. There's a lot of different assessments people run to track those improvements too. And a lot of it you might not see immediately, but over time you should see that progression. And it's important to not get super caught up in the day-to-day and thinking about more of the long term, and just being well aware on different issues that could arise through this process, because it's not always going to be smooth sailing. But ongoing support physically and emotionally is huge for a process like this. And of course, the goal is for everybody to return to physical activity and independence after something like this. And of course, Kevin's goals are above and beyond, because I mean, that's who he is. You go from winning gold medals to something like this. It's hard to tell somebody like you can't compete, because that's literally wired in his DNA. That's what pushed him through rehab, was his competitive spirit too. So
yeah, and then you talking about independence as well. Like I think Kevin really struggled with that too. Whenever he moved back to that home that Ryan was talking about in Carlsbad, he still had to have that roommate with him, because he still really couldn't drive. He couldn't go get his own meds. And I'm sure there's days where he couldn't, like, he probably didn't remember where he was. And like, just it's hard for him to live that independent life, at least in that time period.
Right. And him having seizures too, it's important to have that support structure, because what happens if he does have a seizure and he's independent and there's nobody there to at least witness or be prepared for the worst when something like that happens. So
Yeah, because if he falls and has a full grand mal seizure and falls and hits his head, that's a problem.
it creates so much more complications for the process that it could put him back in that critical to acute phase.
Yeah, definitely.
And then for more so immediate post-injury phase, this is typically a 6-week phase, and that's for quite a bit of conditions. And that's focusing on stabilization, of course, being able to walk and mobilize on your own and do things to prevent further complications such as falling, improving balance. Um, Within 6 weeks of this isn't a very dynamic position. You're going to have a lot of rest, but you want to still be able to get to these points where you are physically active, but not overexerting, just to make sure vitals are steady. There's no other things arising, such as like a stroke, you're having proper blood flow, your heart's doing what it needs to do, your brain's responding how it needs to under stress too. So this is kind of more of a phase that should be taken pretty lightly and not necessarily super aggressive yet. And that's not for all injuries, so to say, but for TBI, it's good to get that rest too and move into more aggressive phases later on when you're ready. And that can definitely range case to case. The early rehab setting, which sometimes typically 6 weeks to 3 months, which Kevin was in a coma for over a month. So this was kind of put on delay for him. But this is where you get into more of the supervised therapeutic exercises, where you see Adam get a little more involved, and that's emphasizing the cognitive and physical rehabilitation side of things. This is where you can kind of see more of the balance exercises in play, more of the eye tracking exercises, which we'll discuss a few different therapies that incorporate that as well later on. But you just want to make sure that you're not overexerting or experiencing major setbacks as well.
Right. And just to reiterate the level of importance of that support structure, Adam talks about when he's going through these rehab exercises with Kevin, how he knows how Kevin thinks and how Kevin's wired. And he turns the rehab exercises into something that's even more beneficial for Kevin and something Kevin gets excited for. Like he would turn these into like competitions and stuff. And I think that can also help tremendously versus just having a physical therapist or a doctor that kind of is just going through the motions with you and you're not necessarily as engaged. Not everything needs to be a competition with everyone, but if you have someone there that knows how you think and how you operate and can really kind of help you in that aspect, I think that also is a big part in the rehabilitation process.
Right. Reiterating your goals and also building those relationships in the process helps out, and they can kind of understand what gets your motor going a little bit more too, and what gets you and keeps you engaged.
Exactly.
And then we move on to the late rehab and return to independence stage, which 6 months to a year or potentially beyond, which is what Kevin was looking at, was a little over a year to 2 years plus. This is more of a situation where you're really trying to get to functional independence, meaning you can live your life how you need to through recreational activities and living in your community without major assistance. So this is looking at the bigger picture for the long term, and that still consists of follow-ups and addressing any other challenges that come up, and being super honest with yourself and your providers too, that if there's something within your lifestyle that you're struggling with that you need to definitely address and assess and get to a better point where you can see that progression. And Kevin's journey is super significant for this too, because he had to have a very high level of commitment for his rehab and being able to adapt when things came up, such as his eye surgeries or like the blood clots and his seizures, which we'll talk about as well, on how the seizures and brain trauma can go hand in hand. But just as long as things are closely monitored and protocols are adjusted as needed, that can be super beneficial for speeding that process up and getting the individual through rehab and getting to them to a point of well-being faster. So I wanted to kind of break down how the brain responds to impact and trauma and how that affects functionality. We'll break this down into the frontal lobe, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. And the frontal lobe its job is to really control motor function, and it has a lot of responsibility for voluntary movement and planning that movement and being able to execute that through communicating to your joints, your tissue, and creating that motor control and reducing impaired coordination. So when you have this kind of impact or trauma, your motor control is highly impaired. The prefrontal cortex can also result into difficulties with planning how you want to do these movements as well, which is why you see a lot of people struggle with even just stepping up on a step. So the frontal lobe is super important for processing what you're trying to execute and what you want to get to, and how your judgment adapts and changes with life too, whether that's gravity or a slip and fall, and how you can respond. And this goes for a lot of different things as well. So that's why if you do have a head injury, maybe don't drive immediately. Try and have somebody else take care of some things for you for a little bit before getting into really challenging your system. Give yourself some time. But the frontal lobe is also important for executive functions, regulating emotions, problem solving, memory recall, as well as short-term memory. So there's a lot that can take place and kind of set you back, especially for his case, because of the trauma through the front side of the left side of his head too. And you see the cognitive impairment and the emotional impairment that takes place, the motor impairments that take place through his process and his journey. And he really does struggle with some of the personality changes as well, that he still wants to get back to that high level of competition, but even socially, his interactions kind of take a negative turn with some friends, some relationships, and that also creates some negativity in terms of feedback for your system too.
Yeah, at one point, one of his buddies talks about how sometimes they're kind of embarrassed to be out with Kevin, because occasionally with that, like you said, personality change and ability to kind of filter, he loses the filter a bit, and he talks about how Kevin kind of can say some embarrassing or inappropriate things sometimes, and it doesn't really click for Kevin, I guess. And yeah, that's just one of the things that his friends notice, you know?
Right. And you can definitely tell his family notices as well. And it's tough for his doctor's appointments. It's tough for social settings. And sometimes it's out of his control just because of the condition or the state that he may look back on and really realize, like, wow, I was in a different state of mind there at the time.
Yeah.
But moving on to the midbrain, which is important for this case because this is where a lot of his scar tissue was within his imaging too. This is what the neurologist kind of touches base on. And a lot of the midbrain trauma creates movement disorders, tremors, coordination deficits, and it can really affect eye movement and coordination, which you see him have the eye surgery as well. He has the tremors through the seizures that take place, especially in his extremities, which is a major point for the midbrain, and seeing that scar tissue. Uh, they don't talk too much about changes in arousal, but you can definitely see the motor deficits take place within the documentary, and the consciousness disturbances. I I feel like that's pretty personal for him, but this can also take place with impact and trauma to the midbrain. So a lot of it can be the eye movement, the coordination, the movement disorders, and tremors as well. And then moving on to the hindbrain. So the hindbrain, the functionality for the hindbrain is to create motor coordination and precision, with also coordination to how fast and how you can accelerate to do and perform skilled movements. So whether that's sprinting or running or walking, this can have a huge impact on how you can balance and move your system, how you can sit, how you can stand, how you can present yourself, so to say. So the cerebellum has a huge importance and job and balance, which long term goes into different diseases like Parkinson's and macular degeneration, Alzheimer's. So the cerebellum has a pretty important job here. And this can affect day-to-day activities. This is why you also see older people shuffle, because they don't feel super confident in taking those steps with high velocity or high acceleration. So the cerebellum, if there is any effect or degeneration there, that this can greatly affect your lifestyle. And then we just want to kind of touch base on to the direct relation to head trauma and concussions. The frontal lobe, midbrain, and midbrain, hindbrain / cerebellum are directly affected. So when you do have a head injury, definitely make those points to at least get checked out or communicate with somebody what's going on with your system, and if you're at a state where you can communicate that. So Chuck has also tied into this as well. Coup contra coup injuries, where acceleration and deceleration forces and head trauma can cause injuries at the side of impact and also on the opposite side of the brain too, which Kevin probably experienced, no doubt, with how he hit the half pipe.
And these type of injuries, they're most commonly seen in car crashes where the head is being thrown forward, and then you get that whiplash effect where it's thrown back. So it's like an acceleration, deceleration forces where the brain's hitting the front of the skull, and it's like also hitting the back. So it's affecting, like, or it could even be side to side or whatever, but it's affecting different areas of the brain.
100%. When you have multiple areas compromised, that can create huge setbacks, which is kind of going hand in hand to diffuse axonal injuries, where that creates a widespread of functional disruptions too. And anything affecting the white matter tracks within the brain and different regions of the brain, that's a serious situation and nothing you want to take lightly.
And a diffuse axonal injury is kind of like the separation of neurons from impact or something like that, which causes concussions.
100%. And then secondary effects too, which we talk about the swelling, we talk about fluid, we talk about inflammation. So intracranial pressure is a major point within head trauma, and you want to keep that as low as possible within a brain injury. So whatever you can do to keep inflammation low and keep intracranial pressure controlled is exactly the route that you should take within something like this. And then, of course, the functional consequences we kind of already talked about. You have the cognitive side, you have the motor skills side, you have the emotional side. memory deficits. There's so many different things, from even changes in personality, anxiety, depression. This is why therapists should get involved in doing your best to try and get to that spot where you can do things that you love and enjoy again is huge, especially within reason too, just given a head injury. And then we did say we'd kind of talk about how seizures and trauma go hand in hand in some cases, not all, but there is a risk of seizures with frontal lobe trauma. There is damage to the frontal cortex and underlying structures, and that is what controls a lot of your motor skills and executive functions, like we've stated before. And the main thing is that it creates abnormal neuronal activity, and that's what could trigger potentially a seizure. And what we want to make sure of, like Chuck described really well beforehand, is if something like this takes place, you want to make sure that, one, you're not creating trauma to your brain again. So making sure there is a safe space that these do take place is huge for the brain, because there's different things that could make things much worse and delay recovery that much longer. And then the midbrain, if you do have a head injury affecting the midbrain, your risk of seizures is increased more than compared to the frontal lobe. And this also disrupts coordination, arousal, and motor control as well. And a lot of the times the alterations are in consciousness and then potential autonomic dysregulation too. When the hindbrain is impacted, there's also an increased risk of seizures too. So the damage may lead to disruptions in neuronal activity, and this could also kind of come hand in hand with motor symptoms, coordination difficulties, and potential alterations to consciousness as well, such as blacking out or passing out, things like that. General mechanisms as well that come with trauma and head injuries is what we call excitotoxicity. It's a process where excessive release of neurotransmitters, excitatory neurotransmitters such as glutamate, leads to neuronal damage and can create hyperexcitability. So like excessive fight or flight or something of that nature, which is really tough on the system. Structural damage, which is something I know the physicians for Kevin took into high consideration in terms of imaging and making sure arteries are intact, veins are intact, that contusions were at a minimum and they were controlled, and then hemorrhages were reduced as much as possible. Chuck did talk about brain hemorrhaging and how that could lead to a very severe situation or life-threatening case. Mm-hmm. Also looking at lesions that could potentially be tumors or something of that nature, which is why an eye test is super important too. Neuroinflammation is something that we also want to keep to a minimal. This also helps the brain optimize properly, or not optimize properly, but optimize function overall and decrease susceptibility to seizures if we can keep neuroinflammation lower. Post-traumatic epilepsy. Some individuals may develop post-traumatic epilepsy, which is recurrent seizures following a head injury, which can be super stressful and taxing on your system. So that kind of goes hand in hand with making sure neuroinflammation is very controlled and reduced, and that we're taking all precautions to keep the brain in the best state as possible, because recurrent seizures is a very dangerous situation for an individual, especially if you're trying to be independent too. One of the I wouldn't say most important, but a very important part of this process was vestibular rehabilitation. And this is a special form of physical therapy that addresses disorders in the vestibular system, and that is mainly controlling balance, spatial orientation, coordination. This helps people with dizziness, vertigo, imbalances, and spatial disorientation as well. Um, the main thing is that vestibular rehab is trying to improve all of these symptoms through different movement patterns, eye exercises, and balance approaches too. So there definitely has to be a thorough assessment by a healthcare professional before proceeding with vestibular rehab. And you want to make sure that everything aligns up before one needing an emergency surgery and making sure everything clears out before going into these exercise protocols. A lot of these have to be customized too because of different approaches. Some you have to be seated, some you have to be standing, some you have to just really focus on eye movement. And a lot of vestibular rehab will put an emphasis on gaze stability. And that is kind of being able to focus on where your eye pattern can actually concentrate and stabilize. So they talk about in the documentary with Kevin how he was getting an astigmatis when he was trying to look to the left and right, which was why he went to emergency surgery for his eyes. Not emergency surgery. Was that emergency surgery?
I wouldn't say it was emergency. I think they scheduled it,
Yeah, that was why they needed to schedule surgery. And there's actually multiple surgeries too, because his eyes couldn't technically handle what his body was demanding at the time. But this goes into helping him improve his balance and promote more of the brain's ability to adapt and stabilize the system too. So like I said, eye exercises are a major part of this process. Some things I've done with patients is picking a spot on a wall and being able to create head movement while focusing on a point on the wall and being able to maintain and keep that focus. This can help reduce a lot of the side effects and symptoms long term, and also improve balance and orientation for head movement. Kind of going on to additional exercises, some people may refer to this as habituation exercises, which to me is being able to improve your proprioception. And that's with repetition, things start to improve a lot better. And that's changing your body position. That's also changing head movements and being able to not have vertigo take place or imbalances that throw your system off and create a fall or dizziness or headaches, things like that of that nature. So building off of that, gaze stabilization exercises with repetition to help clear vision and clean up head movement pattern. And that would be referring to more improving your vestibular ocular reflex, which is a fancy term for really improving your system to where you can track things well without those symptoms arising and improving your balance all in the same time. But not only your balance gets improved, your postural stability gets improved, your weight shifting overall gets improved, and that goes into being able to get more dynamic with your rehab approach and just being able to reduce the limitations that you have on your system to be able to do what you need to do going forward. There are some different repositioning maneuvers. Some may refer to as the Epley remover, which is supposed to help displace inner ear crystals that can cause vertigo. Another term for that would just be BPPV. You can look that up and find some different symptoms that associate with that as well. But vertigo is a big one for an Epley maneuver, which that should be done by somebody who is licensed to do so. Coordination and agility exercises. This is what I would go right into after a lot of the vision disturbances or dizziness. The balance is a little bit more in tune. This is where you can really get into more of the repetitive exercises, the things that demand high repetition in order to improve balance and improve dynamic motion, which can overall improve your strength too, and being able to get back to doing the things that you need to do. Just improving function overall is huge for more of the repetitive activity. I always kind of reference going back to sports. A lot of people do dynamic warm-ups, and that's a great way to get into honestly a day-to-day life protocol to keep your system on top of everything, to be able to reduce tension through your system, to be able to perform at a high level and move at a high velocity as well. So overall, building up to that, you want to just build your way to you can have high strength and high functionality that translates to the real world. And that'll require a lot of neuromuscular re-education and therapeutic exercise that will be tailored to your condition too. So just a couple examples for vestibular rehab exercises, just to kind of get a more broad idea. There's exercises called Brandt-Doroff exercises, and it involves a series of head and body movements that habituate the vestibular system to positional changes. So I always think about how like a receiver can track a ball overhead into their hands, like on a ball that's thrown to the back shoulder. It allows people to track things a lot better and also have that brain to limb coordination to where you can do things without thinking twice about it. The Cawthorn Cooksey exercises, another set of iron. Do what?
Was one of the Brandt-Doroff exercises, was that when Kevin was trying to throw a ball into his brother's arms? Do you remember that? Is that what one of those were?
Yes, and partially the one where he was trying to put I believe this goes into the Cawthorn and Cooksey exercises that we're about to talk about, was where he's putting
the pin in the
he's putting the
straw
pin in the, I guess, the hole.
Yeah, it was a straw, I think.
Oh, it was a straw. Okay,
yeah,
he's putting
he's trying to put the pin in the straw. Yeah,
and he's also doing so while trying to keep his head still, so you can kind of see him get a little bit more accurate with where he's trying to put things where he needs it to. So sometimes that's like seeing how fast you can touch your nose with your finger.
Yeah.
And do that repetitively. See how fast and accurate you can do that.
Or asking point to your elbow and the guy points to his ankle instead, you know.
Yeah, that's a more intense case.
Yeah, that was a rough one. All right, continue.
A lot of times people might use a therapy ball, a Bosu ball, a balance beam, even tandem stance balancing, where you act like you're walking on a tightrope, and using your eyes to open and close during these exercises really helps improve the brain's response to the body. So if you're able to do exercises with your eyes closed, you can actually help improve your proprioception, your awareness in space at a faster rate. So you might see, like Kevin in the documentary, standing with one foot in front of the other, heel to toe, and he's trying to stand there with his eyes closed, and you can see him shaking and trying to stabilize in the same position, which is what they're trying to accomplish within that segment there. They're trying to make sure that he can know that his body is responding and contracting and able to balance without the first line of communication to your nervous system, which is your vision.
Yeah, and you really see him have a hard time with the Bosu ball as well when he's standing on that, even with both feet, not even just one foot at first.
A lot of people every day struggle with that too.
Yeah, it's not the easiest thing. I've always been blessed with great balance. No big deal. But
Honestly, I always credit snowboarders too, just being able to land coming down from a half pipe, because that is
yeah,
not an easy thing just to do a big air and then land smoothly. If you've ever tried to hit a jump on a terrain park or anything while you're
dude,
on the
and
mountain,
even small jumps are difficult. I've gone over a box before and just immediately catch a toe edge, and it's like, all right, cool. I tried, didn't quite work.
sometimes those boxes and rails will sneak up on you too.
They really do.
They get a little bit quicker than they look,
Yeah.
which is why I feel like snowboarding now is gymnastics with a board. It's
Yeah, dude. I mean, look at Zeb Powell.
yeah,
That's his last name, right? Powell?
Powell.
Powell. Yeah, that dude is insane.
He does things that nobody even thinks about doing.
No, he's just out there like literally freestyling and improvising every single trick.
Every single trick.
It's really cool.
He's got his own trick book.
Yeah, his style is really cool. I like watching him ride.
He's a cheat code, no doubt.
Yeah.
So some of the things that you can get into too, which stimulate segments of the brain, increase cranial nerve activity, is getting phonetics involved. So let's say you're saying the alphabet, but you're saying every other letter while trying to stabilize on one leg, while also creating movement through the head or extremities. This will tax your system in a way that you might not be used to, but it also helps improve a lot of those deficits that you might see in a traumatic brain injury, which can also improve the vestibulo-ocular reflex too. That's the main thing, is that you get portions of your brain firing to help improve your system overall, to overcome those daily challenges and get you back to a high functioning position in your life too. It might be funny or somewhat concerning requests from whoever you're working with, but it does pay off at the end of the day. Sometimes I'll have people count to 40 with odd numbers or even numbers, while also trying to create a hinge pattern and raise their arms when they hinge. So
Yeah, that stuff's not even easy without a brain injury,
yeah, or saying the alphabet backwards.
which I couldn't do.
We probably couldn't even do that sitting in this chair right now.
No.
So a lot of this stuff may seem simple, but is actually super challenging to create what we call this multimodal approach to movement and activation. So it definitely gets the brain firing in a different way. And it seemed like Kevin overall had a good team, a good support system to push him in that right direction, to get him where he needed to go, not where he wanted to go. But overall, when you see these activities, it's trying to reduce a lot of that dysfunction, such as blurred vision, dizziness, imbalances, and get you to a point where these disorders start to diminish and you get back that quality of life too. From a traumatic brain injury or a TBI is often a lifelong process, and Kevin Pearce's journey continues to involve a combination of some medical intervention, therapeutic intervention, and lifestyle strategies to optimize functionality and quality of life. The continued awareness and advocacy that he's also promoting through getting people more aware of how important helmets are, and getting into nonprofit situations to help improve that awareness, and also funding too for people that might not have access to further information and experiences, are crucial for individuals who are experiencing or who have not yet experienced or potentially could experience a traumatic brain injury. So
Yeah, it's just really cool to see what he's doing now and how he's giving back to his community, and how, this injury did a 360 on his life, and I'm sure he had a plan and an idea of where his life was going to go, but things worked out differently, and he might not necessarily think it's for the better, but I think he's probably happy with where his life has ended up and how he's being able to help this certain community of people, and how he's really just, the good work he's doing now. I think he's probably still is happy and fulfilled with his life, even though it doesn't involve snowboarding the way he necessarily thought it would.
And I almost think in a way it still kind of does. Like how the friends approach was, he's still able to at least do that and live that lifestyle. It may not be the competitive lifestyle, but he is still able to incorporate that sense of community within snow sports and also the mountain lifestyle as well. So you got to kind of look at the positives here and see that everything kind of works out for a positive reason too. Um,
For sure.
and it's pretty awesome to see him promote more awareness to not only brain injuries but also the sport of snowboarding too.
Yeah, like I said, it's really cool to see how far he's come. Like, I'm sure both of you guys felt this way, but I kind of really grew attached to this story, and it's just really inspiring, and also like super sad throughout the whole thing. There's definitely multiple times where I teared up, and it's really emotional throughout the whole process. But again, you just got to give credit to, like you said, like his support system throughout everything that he's been through. Not only Adam, but his entire family, David, other family and friends that have shown up, and like just the snowboarding community as a whole, who really showed support after this traumatic injury happened to him, and kind of put him on the journey that he's on now.
And you could almost argue it accelerated the sport in a way that people were trying to catch up to him at the same time. And then they started riding for him too. And the sport progressed so quickly during his time he was injured. A lot of those guys had him in the back of his brain or back of their brain the whole time. So I know a lot of that dedication and hard work, they're thinking about Kevin. And he comes back and realizes that the sports progress insurmountably compared to the time he was actually competing, which could be a testament to his skill set at the time before he got injured.
All right, so for discussion topics, just like to wrap up the podcast with the fun little couple questions, and go from there. So, first one, which crash in the documentary like stuck out to you? You know how when they were going through the crash reels of different people, which one really stood out to you?
I'll go first. I think the lacerated spleen one, I think it was Luke Matrani.
Mm-hmm.
That one, he hits a rail and just lands straight on his side and rides the rail on his side.
Yeah.
That one's, other than obviously Kevin's, that one stuck out to me.
Yeah, for sure. That was a nasty one. Dude, any kind of thing where like you mess up an organ, it's not a good time.
I believe this was a big air skateboarding crash.
Oh, did you take mine, you son of a gun?
This one though, I remember seeing it live. This was
Is it the one where his shoes go flying?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the exact one I was thinking. I remember seeing that live too. It's Jake Brown, I think is his name.
Yep. Around 2007 or so, there's X Games crash.
Yeah.
I remember watching that and just being shell shocked because this was like real time live, and it just rocked the whole stadium when it happened. I was going to say, of course, Kevin's too. I mean, that rocked the world as well. But I mean, you also look at some of the motocross guys, the freestyle guys, the gentleman who was paralyzed after his crash.
Yeah, there's two. I think there was a motocross one and a snowmobile. They both like try to do front flips and don't get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing those live too.
Those are bad. But yeah, dude, that skateboarding one, as soon as he gets off the ramp and in the air, the board is just detached from him. And like he's nowhere near it, and he's just flying through the air. Like doesn't even get any of the ramp, just goes flat area.
And the
And
impact just shooting his shoes off his feet
oh,
just
dude,
blew my
yeah.
mind.
Oh, and he's out cold, isn't he?
He was out cold.
Dude, that's a wicked fall.
That is hard to put into words what he was probably thinking at that time.
Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! Like, that's what I would be thinking.
I would be thinking the same thing.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. All right. How do we rate this injury? So for this, moving forward, we're going to kind of compare it to other injuries that we talk about, but this being the first episode kind of gets our first rating. So what do you guys think? Where's this rate on a scale of 1 to 10?
I would say like a hard 9, just because how serious it is. But I know there's probably going to be something that we talk about that might be even more serious.
I mean, I'm right there with you.
It's a life-changing event, and I think it's got to be up there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd put this on probably about a 9.6. Mainly, I mean, you're turning a whole new chapter in your lifestyle. You're barely making this one out alive too. So it's not a 10 because he is back to almost living the life how he wants to.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some impairment that took place to the process that is not your everyday injury.
For sure. I'm right there with you guys. I'm giving it a solid. I'll give it a 9.3. But not really because of like the initial, well, I guess it is. For me, it's the rehab process and how it's a lifelong thing and how it's just so difficult. It's a grind to like the fullest extent, and it's just so difficult to deal with day in and day out, not just for you but for your family too. Like it's such a grind, and it really, again, it goes to show his character and like the perseverance and like just the mentality that he carried through the whole thing. Even though there were times when he was struggling with it, it's a crazy injury. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I give it 9.3.
You got to think about the long term here too, on how this could affect his system when he's 50 and 60. And
oh yeah,
I mean, it's not just no, this was only 2-3 years. This goes for a long way.
all right, let's move on to our pop culture discussion topic. So for this week, I came up with, what's your favorite sports movie that inspired you? Since we had a kind of inspiring, actually not kind of, a very inspiring story here.
Honestly, recently, just because we were watching this documentary, this one,
This one.
that first song, the Paper Romance by Groove Armada, that one takes me back. That takes me back to the time where I really started getting into snowboarding and kind of started falling in love with the sport a little bit, and was starting to get good at it too, somewhat. I was getting those skills together, and it just kind of put some nostalgia in my brain a little bit.
I mean, it's definitely an inspiring documentary.
Heard that song and I got goosebumps through my system, like
yeah,
back of the neck to the feet. You're just like, what's happening? So I would say this one, just because, I mean, it hits close to home. It could happen to anybody in a situation like this, and it put me in a spot where, emotions were pretty high, and
yeah,
it makes you think about those times you're out there with your buddies, and makes you thankful for that.
Yeah, definitely. Makes you really kind of live in the moment when you think about stories like this.
No doubt.
All right, Ryan?
Well, I was trying to stay away from saying this one, so I was thinking like a Bethany Hamilton movie. I just liked her story and how inspiring she was. So she has the Unstoppable documentary that came out in 2018. That's a pretty good one. And then obviously, like the more cinematic one is the Soul Surfer. So
Okay, that's who I thought that was. I knew I recognized that name. I didn't remember exactly who she was. But after you said Soul Surfer, I got it.
yes, yeah,
Yeah, that's a good movie too.
Yeah, that is a good one. For me, I thought of I think it's called Glory, the USA hockey Olympic team whenever they beat Russia
Oh yeah.
yeah.
with what's the guy who plays the head coach? What's that actor's name?
Kurt Russell.
Kurt Russell, that's right. I don't know why. I love that movie. That movie gets me jacked every time I see it.
The speech. You just like the speech.
Dude, the speech is good, and then that night where he just makes them basically run wind sprints literally all night after a game after they get the shit kicked out of them by somebody. Oh, it's just a great all around movie.
On skates too.
Yeah, dude, no kidding. Next, so this week, since it's snowboarding, what's our favorite places that we've ever been snowboarding?
There's so many good ones. I kind of want to say Aspen Snowmass just because it felt like a one-time thing, like opportunity I got. And it was just an awesome trip. And snow was great. So much powder.
That was a fun trip. I mean, you got to the top of the mountain and it felt like you were in another world. There was clouds around you. It was snowing really hard. There was powder everywhere. It felt like we were on another planet with a board on our feet.
Hell yeah, that's sick. I'm jealous. I've been to Aspen, but I've never been snowboarding in that area.
That was a great trip. We went from Breckenridge for a few days and then Snowmass, and I mean that was like peak winter too. There's a lot of good snow. I think it was -10 a couple times.
Oof, that's a little cold.
It was pretty cold.
Is that your pick too?
Not quite, I don't believe. I think honestly there's some pretty cool spots out in Oregon. Um I would say Ski Bowl was a pretty unique experience because it's the largest night skiing resort in America. And when I went night skiing there, one, I was by myself for a day and there was huge snowfall going on. And I felt like I was just I felt like I was in a video game. Like I felt like I was in Shaun White's video game.
Hell yeah, that's sick.
And you're going through these different trails where you're just following the light at the end of the tunnel because it's pitch black and you feel like you're in the wild.
Yeah, that's one thing I haven't got to do yet. I really want to go night skiing. I've never been.
And it's a huge night skiing resort. Like I said, largest in America.
That's cool. Hell yeah.
Very unique experience. It's hard to compare.
I think I remember seeing videos that you posted from that trip, if I remember right.
It's a cool little drive too. I mean, you're going through the trees into Mount Hood. Beautiful drive.
Hell yeah, dude. Mine, I would probably say Copper Mountain by far. I think that's my favorite mountain I've ever been to so far in Colorado. Have y'all been there?
I haven't been to Copper yet, no.
Dude, Copper is sick. And it's one of the more difficult mountains from what I've heard and from the mountains I've been on. You know, it's one of those places that's perfect for snowboarders because there's not a lot of flat areas and it's just great riding. And I'm pretty sure while I was there, I had a great powder day too. So
Even better.
It was just perfect.
Those powder days hit different.
Oh, they really do.
I will say that time in Ski Bowl in Oregon, that was when I really started getting some speed under my board. I'd just throw on some Tame Impala or...
Start getting that confidence?
Yeah, it was like as fast as I could go, you name it. It felt really good. It felt fresh.
No, I know that feeling. It's a good feeling once you finally start feeling like you can actually ride a bit, you know?
And it wasn't packed. It was pretty wide open.
Even better. The next equipment recommendation for the sport of the week. So for snowboarding, what would your equipment rec be? I think all of ours might be the same thing, honestly.
Well, I know the helmet is up there, but I'm gonna say something different here.
Okay.
You might be familiar with the collar that Tony Pollard on the Dallas Cowboys wears.
No, tell me about it.
It's called the Q collar.
The Q collar.
And it looks like a headband around his neck, but it doesn't necessarily cover the front of his throat. So it's almost like a horseshoe shape collar that goes around the back of his neck. And it's supposed to help protect against head injuries by reducing brain movement overall. And the design to it is supposed to increase blood volume to the brain. And it does that by slightly applying pressure to actually the jugular vein.
So it kind of puts more fluid in the brain to provide more cushion, kind of?
Exactly.
Okay.
But it helps apparently reduce harmful internal movement overall. So less shaking of the brain, less violent head movement. And then I think it might create a little bit more alertness just because of that pressure on the side of the neck. So I guess if you're trying to do something more dynamic or high level, there's studies that they say it has helped improve that. And also there hasn't been any injuries associated while using the collar that they know of.
Yeah.
Give or take, not all injuries are preventative, but
no, that's cool.
They said there's no negative effects to wearing it overall.
No, they're always trying to find more innovative solutions nowadays, ever since, concussions became this gigantic thing in the news at the NFL.
Yeah, no doubt. But whatever gives you that next edge, like, makes me think of those balance bracelets going back to 2010, 2011.
Those didn't do anything.
Do you think
those
that was
didn't
placebo?
Do a thing. Yeah, dude, that was all bullshit.
They look cool though.
They did look. I had one. I'm not gonna lie. I had one.
I had one too.
I don't think they did anything.
You know, I had one that I wore it so much that it ended up filling with water in the middle balance disc area, and it popped. So I stopped wearing it.
Nice. All right, Ryan.
All right. Well, I got a helmet, so I'm gonna say a helmet.
Nice.
I got the a non-invert MIPS helmet. It's a patent brain protection system. So you got that working for you.
Good. But that's exactly what I was going with too.
I think it's pretty obvious nowadays. We know we should wear a helmet. Back then we were like, nah, we're good enough. But now you're like, oh yeah, I should probably wear it.
We're not that good.
Yeah, it was more of like, I want to look cool. I don't want to be a nerd with a helmet on. What's that about? No, wearing a helmet is cool now. Please, for the love of God, wear a helmet.
Yeah, you can put stickers on it.
Yeah, you can. For sure, you can swag it out.
Look at every professional snowboarder. They are all wearing helmets.
Hey, in biking too. Wear a helmet on a bike.
Yeah, everything. Anything and everything. Put a helmet
just
on.
Running.
Please.
You're just out there running, wear a helmet.
Yeah, running. Yeah, I'm going to go run my marathon that I'm preparing for in a helmet.
Nice bicycle helmet on.
Hey, it could have built-in fans or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaker system too.
Got snack compartments on the side.
Hell yeah. Speaking of snacks, good segue. What's a nutritious brain food people can eat in order to improve their health in our nutrition discussion topic?
I got 2.
Give it to me.
Salmon and avocados.
Oh, you stole one of mine.
They're good. They give you some
one?
healthy fats to the brain.
The salmon.
Oh, I was thinking avocados.
No,
so you stole both of ours.
Dang.
You son of a...
Healthy fats to the brain, reduce headaches, potentially. Reduce migraines, potentially.
Yeah.
Good for brain development.
As long as you get a salmon without worms in it.
Yeah, let's try and stay away from that one.
Yeah.
Toilet would appreciate it.
Ryan?
H2O, baby.
There
We're
you
hydrating.
Hydrating.
That works. Way to think on your feet. Good
Thanks.
job. Mine's gonna just be regular nuts or walnuts or stuff like that. Those are always good for your brain.
A dark chocolate out there too.
Dark chocolate is the ringer, dude. A lot of people are like, but you are eating that sugar with it. The sugar's not necessarily a great thing.
With the
but
sea
dark
salt.
chocolate is.
Hey, some dark chocolate is actually pretty low in sugar.
All right, moving on now to the category we've all been waiting for: our jokes of the day.
Jokes of the day.
Somebody lay it on me.
I'll go first.
All right, let's hear it.
Why were the skis worried about his snowboard buddy?
Why?
What do you think, Ryan?
I was going to say something about splitting, but I don't know.
Hey, I wrote this one on my own.
Oh yeah.
He was always riding on the edge.
Oh.
Clever, dude. Nice. That's pretty good off the dome, not gonna lie. All right, Ryan.
Why did the snowboarder crash into the skier?
Why?
Because the skier was BSing around.
Oh my gosh. Backside.
I got another one off the internet if you want it.
Give it to me, sure.
What do you call a snowboarder without a girlfriend?
No, that's mine. Stop it.
Is it?
Yeah, that's the
Wow,
one.
you're real original.
Dude, that's the one it was on every time I typed in funny snowboarding jokes. It was on every website I clicked.
The one I found it on was like a generator.
So what is it?
Thing? Go ahead.
No, you say it.
So what do you call a male snowboarder without a girlfriend? Homeless. So stupid. So dumb. All right, fitness hour, fitness discussion. What are we doing, boys? Do we want to make it a competition, or are we doing our own thing? What's up?
How about we do bodyweight air squats?
How are we gonna keep track of that?
Exactly.
What?
You got to count.
All right, honor system,
Yeah, honor system.
body weight air squats.
And you can't be like 10,000.
I mean, what if I get to 10,000?
Bullshit.
Gonna video it?
Yeah, just video me squatting around my apartment.
Hey, lunges don't count.
I don't know. That could be all right. Fine, that could be funny. What do you think, Ryan?
So is it just a total number by the end of 2 weeks?
I guess so.
All right. Well, you better keep track. I'm going for 10,000.
You can do it.
That's it. Body weight squats. Got it.
All right. Sure.
All right. Moving on. What's been your favorite concert venue you've been to, and who did you see there?
Oh, I know what you gonna say.
What? What am I gonna say?
You're gonna say Mount Joy at Red Rocks.
You got the venue. You didn't get the band.
Damn.
Wiz Khalifa, Red Rocks.
Yeah, definitely. That's funny.
I think he's coming out. I think he's coming to Red Rocks soon.
Actually?
Yeah.
No, mine was I saw Camp. I saw Camp at Red Rocks.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I saw Mount Joy at Stubbs in Austin.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And at ACL, actually. I've seen them twice.
Nice.
All right. Ryan?
I'll say Lil Uzi Vert at the Toyota Pavilion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, last time I saw Lil Uzi Vert, I was in the crowd and my feet weren't on the ground. That's how many people were there. Like, we were over here, like, just gradually building up.
Where'd you see him?
It's in Irving, the Toyota Pavilion.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
The last time I saw Lil Uzi Vert, I was blackout drunk at ACL. So I don't remember seeing Lil Uzi. That was fun.
I think I might have to say Tame Impala at ACL.
That was a good one.
It was a good time frame when I saw him. I was really into him, and
That was with you, wasn't I?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that concert melted my brain, actually.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of it, to be honest.
I had a full carafe of champagne.
Oh, I remember that. Oh my God. I don't know why you bought that.
Dude, it was cheaper than a glass. It was like $30.
That was nasty. Whatever. It worked, I guess.
It worked, but I felt like my brain melted and I went to space. It was a cool setup though. Gorillas was cool too. I was super surprised because I like Gorillas growing up. I never really hated them, but I never was like, I got to go see them. And then went and saw them and I was like, holy cow, they're like the real deal.
They were really good.
30, 40 performers on stage, artists.
Oh yeah.
I think De La Soul was on stage too.
Were they? I don't remember them.
I think so. There was a lot of different artists on stage with them, so it made it pretty cool. A lot of different instrumentation. The visuals were like next to none.
Hell yeah.
Saw a lot of people at ACL.
Yeah, that's where a lot of my concerts have been too.
If y'all have any questions or comments, put them in there.
But yeah, any questions or comments, like Tyler just said, throw them up on an Instagram post in a comment section. DM us. We'll kind of figure out maybe a better system on a way to get questions, but for now, we'll just kind of go off of like that. And if you want to check us out and maybe our clothing apparel, just check out the Wavy Gang website. That's wvygng.com.
www.wvygng.com. Wavy Gang.
Wavy Gang. That's our extreme sport clothing apparel line. We got some cool stuff in there.
We got some stuff on the way.
Mm-hmm. We're going to be planning on posting a new episode with a new injury or medical condition every 2 weeks.
All sports related for the most part.
All sports related. And yeah, really just, again, the whole point of this podcast is we're just kind of promoting the sports that we love, getting people to go out there and really enjoy them, while at the same time knowing the safety precautions you need to take and knowing what to do in the event of something happening. So that's what we're about here, promoting health and fitness and the sports we love.
Dropping some knowledge.
There you go. Yeah, we'll throw the resources, if we can, up on our website under a podcast section. And if you guys are interested in those sources, go check them out there. And if you guys have Amazon Prime, I highly recommend going to see the Crash Reel. Go watch it. It's a really, really fascinating and inspiring story. All right. Well, if that's it, guys, we'll see you on the next one in about 2 weeks.
All right. Sounds good.
Stay wavy. Peace out.
Stay wavy.